Hello and welcome to EMJ's specialist oncology podcast, Onc Now. I'm your host for this episode, Dr. Catherine Glass, and I'm delighted to welcome today's guest, Dr. Anna Minchom. Dr. Minchom is a consultant medical oncologist at the Royal Marsden Hospital and a key member of its drug development unit. She is a recognised leader in early phase clinical trials and translational oncology, with a particular focus on lung cancer, targeted therapies, and innovative trial designs. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today, Dr. Minchom. Right. Brilliant. So let's start with some questions. Tell us a bit about your journey into oncology and what initially drew you to medicine, and then specifically to lung cancer research.
I did my medical training in Wales, in the University of Wales in Cardiff, and then sort of proceeded through my general medical training. And I guess I was always drawn towards oncology because I've always really valued the patient contact. And when you are dealing with oncology patients, you're really trying to help and support patients at a very vulnerable and tricky time of their lives. And I really valued that relationship and the skills you need to be able to communicate and treat patients with cancer. But then alongside that, you get all the science. So having to understand about how and why cancer develops, understanding how cancer can be treated, and the different drugs that you can start to try and design and use to actually treat cancer. So I think it offers that very interesting dichotomy of having to be really, really patient focused, but also really get the science as well. And as a sort of clinical researcher, then you have to take that extra step as well and know about trials, how to run clinical trials safely and how to design clinical trials to get the best information, the best data from that trial to ultimately try and improve outcomes for patients.
Fantastic. And why lung cancer? What was it about lung cancer that really piqued your interest?
I think there's many different solid tumor areas that are interesting and have had some really exciting developments. I think lung cancer is particularly interesting because, like a few other tumor types, you have a real broad spectrum of different cancers or different ways that cancer can develop. So you've got your smoking-derived lung cancers. Um, but they're actually quite different, both in way how they develop and in terms of their treatments, from some other groups of cancers, which are non-smoking related lung cancers. So there's a variety of different sort of ways of determining them, but non-oncogene addicted or actionable genomic alteration lung cancers. And then we have other groups of lung cancer and thoracic malignancies, such as small cell lung cancer, where we have seen perhaps less development in the last years, but that's a very interesting a group where we are actually starting to see some development happen, which is exciting. And then mesothelioma as well. So it's very diverse with if you're doing a clinic, you have lots of different types of treatments and types of patient problems to try and get your head around as well.
Fantastic. So you work at the drug development unit at the Royal Marsden Hospital. How do you approach the planning of early phase clinical trials to strike that right balance between advancing scientific discovery whilst addressing the needs, safety, and experience of patients?
Yeah. So let me just sort of say the basics that phase one trials are obviously the first stage of drug development. And that's when you're taking drugs that have been used either in no patients before or few patients before, fresh out of the laboratory. And you are running a trial to try and find the right dose of the drug and look in detail at the side effects. So the first thing is that you've got to run these trials really, really safely. So you're using drugs that um, the laboratory test can predict the side effects to some degree, but no laboratory test is going to be perfect at predicting what you're going to encounter when you start using those drugs in patients. So safety first all the time, and clinical trials are designed so that the patients are monitored extremely carefully. It's logistically really complicated for a patient taking part in a phase 1 trial. Lots of appointments in hospital, overnight stays often when you're first dosing with the drug. Um, but alongside that, you're also trying to get the best data you can from a phase 1 trial. You need to be making sure that you're interrogating in detail what are the drug levels in the body, so-called pharmacokinetics, and also trying to get information on how the drugs are working, be that through biopsies or blood tests, but looking at what scientifically is going on in the body when the patient is taking that drugs. So it's balancing the science and the safety against also these patients who are at a very difficult time,
Mm,
often with some limited life expectancy, and
mm.
ensuring that they maintain their quality of life on trial. So
Yeah.
there's a whole pattern of work about making sure patients get, for example, travel expenses refunded, that are really supported, that know who to call if they're having problems, that their family is supported. The whole package to try and ease the patient's journey through these trials. And when you're doing a phase 1 clinic, and talking to patients about potentially about a trial, it's very humbling because patients will often talk about an altruistic aspect. If I'm not gonna help, might not help me, because we know that, the chance of responding clinically to a phase 1 trial is low, but it might help somebody else. And at my clinic on Friday, patients mentioned that to me, at least 2 patients. And
Wow.
that's very humbling,
Mm.
because, imagine having that sort of idea in your head whilst you're in this very difficult time of your life. So, it's our job to make sure that they are supported to do that trial and are as comfortable and of course safe as possible whilst participating.
Fantastic. And I was thinking that out of interest, is it fairly easy to recruit patients to these trials? Is there a sort of appetite from patients as a rule, or actually is it the opposite where it can be tricky?
It's very dependent on
Mm.
people's personal circumstances and
Yes.
viewpoints.
Yes.
So, are there enough patients to go on clinical trials, phase 1 trials? Absolutely, because unfortunately, cancer's common, metastatic cancer, advanced cancer is common. Um, but from a patient level, then you see a whole spectrum of viewpoints. Either that I just want to try something, I know it's a small chance of response, but I would like to try something, or this is an experiment that I don't want to partake in because I've got better things to do with my time. I want to focus on quality of life and spend time with my family and all of that. So on a patient level, it's very broad. I suppose it's sometimes tricky to match the patient to a trial because, for safety reasons, the phase 1 trials have very, very strict criteria about fitness level, about, resilience of the body, so, cardiac factors, blood test parameters. So some fairly often, though patients may want to participate, there's an aspect of their clinical condition that means they can't go on a trial.
That makes sense. So, drug resistance remains a major challenge in lung cancer. From your perspective, what are some of the most promising strategies to overcome or prevent this drug resistance?
So let's go positive first of all. We've got the amazing stuff has happened in lung cancer in the last sort of decade. You know, we've got immunotherapy now that really has transformed care for patients with non-small cell lung cancer and small cell. So we use immunotherapy in a first line setting alongside chemotherapy or on its own in non-small cell lung cancer, and that has really improved outcomes. But it doesn't work forever, you're absolutely right, and drug resistance comes in and the patient's cancer stops responding. Um, I think there has been a plateau in improving outcomes since the first round of immunotherapies, PD-1, PD-L1 inhibitors have been introduced. Um, and there's been a lot of work done to look at ways of overcoming resistance to drugs. Um, I don't think we've not actually seen anything come through into licensed approval in first-line non-small cell lung cancer for a little while now. So we, we haven't yet turned that next corner and reached that next plateau, I wouldn't have said. But there's loads of interesting stuff coming through. And if I was gonna pick the sort of the top 2 drug classes, I would say that's antibody drug conjugates and T-cell engagers. So antibody drug conjugates, there's an antibody specific to a target on the cancer cell, and attached to that is something akin to chemotherapy. So hoping to deliver chemotherapy type drugs directly to the cancer cell. And we've got some notable drugs coming through in that space. And then T-cell engagers, which have recently shown some promise in small cell lung cancer, is when there's a drug that attaches both to the cancer cell by a specific target and then to a T-cell. So bringing the immune cell in direct proximity to the cancer cell. And so, if I was going to sort of pick two drug classes, I would say those are the most exciting at the moment. And hopefully we'll see some, phase 3 trials confirming that these are going to improve outcomes in non-small cell lung cancer at some point soon.
Fantastic. Loving that optimism. Back to trials. You've been involved in several first in human and phase 2 studies. What makes early phase clinical trials uniquely rewarding and challenging in your eyes?
So I think we've already touched on what are the challenges of running phase 1 trials. They're complicated, um, but they are the first step of drug development. You can't move on to your phase 2 and phase 3 unless you've done your phase 1. Sometimes your phase 3 doesn't happen because drugs can sometimes get licensed on the back of a phase 2, but I don't think you can miss out a phase 1 trial. So it's really exciting to be at that forefront of seeing these drugs come through. And you get to be involved as a researcher in drugs that then come through into phase 2 and then licensed. And that's really exciting to know that drug from its beginnings. There are disappointments for sure because there is a quite a large attrition rate of drugs that do not make it through phase 1. That's appropriate if drugs are not safe enough, if they're not even um, showing any signs at all of efficacy. They shouldn't progress further through because you want to be taking drugs through to further development that really have a chance of changing care.
Yeah.
Um, I think we're getting better at either focusing efforts on drugs that are going to show proper promise. Um, but yes, I would say they're challenging, but ultimately rewarding.
And with trials, and forgive me, this I am not an academic and I don't partake in regular research, but do you get have you recently been surprised by results of trials? Does that sort of happen where things sort of move in a direction that you weren't expecting them to do? And let's focus on any sort of positive, perhaps, surprises that you've had in recent trials that you weren't necessarily expecting, or does that not really happen?
I think it's really difficult to tell in advance because
Mm,
the sort of information you're looking at when a phase 1 trials opens is a pack of information derived from cell lines. So these are, immortalized cancer cells that
mm.
are put in. I mean, I don't do lab research, so lab researchers will be tearing their hair out, but put in a posh petri dish and drugs put on top. Far more complicated than that. But, information that is derived from cells that are used in a lab, which are a poor can be a poor predictor of what happens in a
Mm,
in a patient. And then, of
mm,
course, animal testing because, we do need mouse models to look at safety and other aspects.
absolutely.
So your package of information um, doesn't really reflect what happens
Mm,
in patients to a full extent.
mm,
But yes, you absolutely have positive surprises, and you can see when trials are being run that there are a particular group of patients that seem to be responding well. And that's often one of the challenges when in drug development is picking out which patients are best going to benefit from that drug. Um, increasingly in non-small cell lung cancer, particularly, we have our groups of patients who have targetable aberrations I mentioned before, and there you're picking drugs which are specifically based on the molecular characteristics, the mutations found in that cancer. And then you have a much better chance of finding a drug that that works in that patient group. Um, and but no, we have seen drugs that have come through phase one and are doing extremely well and have come through to licensing. So, but but it's certainly not all doom and gloom by any means.
Wonderful. And looking ahead, you've touched on antibody drug conjugates and so on, but what emerging technologies or therapies are you most excited about?
Um, Actually, I suppose what I'm most interested as these drugs come through is they are quite complex drug with complex pattern of side effects. And what I'm really interested in is how we deal with those side effects well. So the T-cell engagers that I mentioned have a particular pattern of side effects that includes something called cytokine release syndrome, where you have a cytokine outpouring because of the way the drug works, activating the immune system, and that can cause problems with fever and changes in blood pressure. And we are needing to develop both in terms of how the drugs are designed, so special chemistry to reduce those side effects happening, but also getting better at dealing with the side effects when they happen to make them more tolerable for patients. And those sorts of lessons actually are can also be applied to things like antibody drug conjugates. They have particular side effects associated with them that vary according to the target. And so, really, there's a whole body of work about getting better at identifying side effects and treating side effects and stopping side effects in the first place with drug design. And I think that's what will make the difference with a lot of these technologies when you're actually using them, in the NHS or even getting them through to licensing.
Fantastic. Yes, as a GP, I see sort of a lot of more mild side effects from oncology, but of course you also see, well, the sort of common, more worrying side effect from oncology treatment is, of course, neutropenic sepsis, which is sort
Yes.
of when we all become a bit concerned and arrange urgent admissions and so on. Is this might be a bad question, forgive me, but is neutropenic sepsis, is that becoming a less frequent side effect because of greater controls, because of sort of more appropriate therapies, or is that still a very prominent outcome for oncology patients in your area?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it is less common. We are good at modifying the doses of drugs. We are good at giving blood supportive stuff such as GCSF, granulocyte colony stimulating factor, which you give mid-cycle or just when you've given the chemotherapy to reduce that dip and reduce that neutropenic sepsis that can happen. Having said that, it still happens and it still carries a fatality.
Mm.
You know, because I treat lung cancer, then patients with lung cancer, smoking-derived lung cancer, often have COPD. They are at an increased risk of, you know, pneumonia. A COPD patient can often have recurrent chest infections,
Mm.
and neutropenic sepsis is a real concern for them. So yes, it's less common, but it still needs to be taken really seriously, because patients absolutely can still die from neutropenic sepsis.
Absolutely. Right, ending on a positive. If you had three magic wishes for your area of oncology and healthcare more broadly, what would they be? Only three, Anna, please.
Oh, well, I can sort it in two. So
Oh,
cure
excellent.
cure patients and prevent cancer developing. It's so big.
Listen, you're not God. No. That's very good. I love that. Excellent.
Well, they were magic wishes, you said. So,
True.
I
True.
mean, we need to be striving to provide long-term control of people's cancer who have metastatic cancer. It is aspirational, it's incremental steps. And, I work in lung cancer, so my second magic wish of cancer prevention also has a solution. So, you know, smoking, you know, stopping smoking. And my third magic wish is equity to drugs. So, these are very expensive drugs. If we can provide equity to these to access to these drugs within our UK health systems, then that's also a good wish, I think.
Fantastic. Dr. Anna Minchom, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Onc Now, and to our listeners as well. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave us a review, and share it with your colleagues. Bye bye for now.